Hey there, it's Silver, and this is Hellclock. So in my previous video on Shape of Dreams, I mentioned this game, but then I realized I'd never actually covered it, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to fix that now that I noticed the gap. Hellclock is another top-down roguelite, although it's not going for the MOBA influences that Shape of Dreams was, but rather mixing ARPG goodness with elements of survivor-likes. This game also has a really interesting setting, although it may appear at first like a sort of dark fantasy cowboys versus demons sort of setup. It actually has a basis in a real event in history. It's based on the War of Canudos that happened in Brazil in 1896. This war involved the military forces of Brazil facing off against a rural settlement called Canudos. It was a bloodbath, with several military incursions killing many of the inhabitants, and finally using a fourth wave to sweep in and burn down the entire settlement, while basically massacring the remaining inhabitants. I don't know much about this time, so I'm not going to claim to be an expert on one side or the other, but I do know that the estimated death toll by the end is often said to be around 25 to 30,000 people, which just feels tragic and unnecessary. The game basically uses that conflict as a backdrop to inviting demonic and undead forces into the chaotic confusion that the war created. It doesn't help that this mostly took place in a region referred to as the Backlands, which was like a drought-ridden desert-like expanse that seems like an absolutely miserable place for events like this to happen. For an extra bit of authenticity, this game has voice acting and it's all in Brazilian Portuguese, which I thought was a pretty nice touch. Visually, Hellclock is a very dark game, fitting of its subject matter, I feel. Everything seems to have a base background of dark and inky, I suppose. Then the colors are piled on top of that. I've noticed the game tends to use mostly earth tones, especially for the environments, with any brighter tones reserved for things that are magical. Your spell-type skills tend to use brighter colors, and bosses often have this dark, sort of jagged look, imbued with a magic of deep colors like reds, greens, and purples. This extends to the UI, by the way. The skill icons for spells tend to be more colorful than others, and the more powerful an item is, the more saturated and royal its color will be. Very high rarity stuff often glows gold, and legendary relics are a bright red, which immediately draws the eye when they drop. It seems like the devs are using UI colors to draw attention to particularly potent things, basically telling the player, hey, look at this. One thing I really like is that in addition to all of your standard menus and stuff, the various forms of meta progression in the game have unique menus that are themed well and don't look like any other one. Like, say, the reliquary versus the bell versus the constellations. They all have their own flavor. This sort of stuff always strikes me as important in RPGs like this because the player is spending a decent amount of time in these menus, so designing them well helps that whole process go more smoothly. But aside from the heavily shaded, almost graphic novel-esque appearance of everything, there's also the music. We've got a dark cowboy kind of theme, twangy strings and moody chords, but there's also a strong presence of some old-school sounds that I assume would be like 19th century Brazilian musical influence. Some dirty brass and almost jazz-like interludes mixed with all those acoustic strings being played. I really like the way the music sounds. It's engrossing and seems to fit wherever you are pretty effortlessly. A soundtrack that's equal parts haunting dark fantasy and dirty traditional sections. I always appreciate it when I see something cultural or historical and they've managed to make the music bring those themes to life while playing, especially for cultures I'm not really familiar with. The soundtrack is available as a separate purchase on Steam, by the way, and I'd say it's well worth getting. You get 44 tracks from all over the game, and it's only $5. As someone who's always looking to expand my absurd music collection, this is a great way to do it. Overall, I find the audiovisual presentation of Hellclock to be both engrossing and well-made. Everything seems unified, like it's all working together to create an interesting atmosphere. I actually think that high-quality music and visual design is very important in roguelites, maybe more than people realize. These are games where you repeat content many times, where each new biome needs to feel like an interesting bit of progress, and where the music needs to shoulder the theme and immerse you without numbing the experience by being overly simple or repetitive. It's a tough balance to find, and I always like seeing how each new game in the genre tries its hand at striking that equilibrium. The gameplay here starts out pretty simple and direct, but you'll quickly find that as objectives and mechanics get added and fleshed out, there's actually quite a bit to keep in mind during a run. As soon as you start, you'll be plopped into the first area of the act you chose, and you can start moving. Each area is quite small and linear, meant to be conquered in a very short time. At the end, there'll be an orange portal that takes you to the next floor. The headlining mechanic here is the titular hell clock, which you'll notice in the upper left corner. It starts at 7 minutes by default and is always counting down 1 second at a time. Once it ticks down enough, the sound will become muffled and your character will comment on feeling weak. Then the moment it hits 0, you'll die on the spot and your run will be over. This mechanic might seem like a nightmare for people that hate timers in games, and I'll admit I'm usually one of those people, but there are several reasons why it's not as bad as it sounds at first. For one, whenever you reach a horde defense mini-boss floor, as well as the big story boss floors, the timer mercifully freezes until you teleport to the next area. This means you don't have to worry about time ticking down during the really hard and involved fights. Another nice thing, you can drop clock seconds as loot. These are auto-collected and add 30 seconds to the time back onto the clock. They drop from elite enemies and bosses as well as golden chests. Story bosses often drop like 1.5 to 2 minutes worth at a time. The meta progression also has ways to permanently extend the timer by quite a bit. So although it starts at 7 minutes, you'll quickly be able to set it at around 10.5 minutes and then go up from there as you progress. There's also the point that the whole game is tightly designed around the clock, which makes it feel like it fits in, rather than being an annoyance on top of everything else that works fine without it. The way the floors are these hectic tunnels of destruction that you can blast through in under 30 seconds means that the gameplay itself focuses on building damage and survivability in order to send you through increasingly tough floors as fast as possible. I was a bit worried about the timer when it first started, honestly, but after a few runs, it becomes apparent that the game works best because of it rather than it taking away from the experience. Although there is a relaxed mode that you can toggle at any time in the options menu that allows you to play without the timer completely. So if you still find it gets in your way, you can shut it off with one button press. During a run, you'll have several skills there on the skill bar, and it's all about making a build with them and using them to the best extent you can to survive. All skills, including your dodge dash, use mana, that purple orb over there, and they use it fast too. However, it also regens relatively quickly, and you have a base attack that's pretty weak but recharges it with hits. You can choose to replace the attack if you want, but that'll leave you with only passive regen for mana. Enemies start coming in hordes right off the bat. They don't ease you into it. You start each run at level 1, but gather levels as you cut through the groups. When you level up, you get a choice between 3 blessings. These are enhancements to whatever skills you have in your loadout, save the basic attack, of course. They come in various rarities, which determines their strength, and each skill has several possible upgrades you could roll. Obviously, the point here is to stack various powerful blessings up on the main skills you're using to make them ridiculous. The sillier they become, the more quickly you can handle each floor and move on before the clock runs low. There'll also be loads of loot flying all over the place as you go, mostly gold and trinkets. Gold is something you'll want to gather for various things I'll get into in a sec, but trinkets are basically a condensed version of Diablo-style loot drops. Loot is auto-hoovered up for you, and trinkets work in a way where you never have to pause the run to look through an inventory and compare things. They're meant to be fast. Trinkets come in various flavors of passive stat increase. When you pick one up and the slot for it is empty, it'll auto-equip itself. If the slot is already occupied, then the game will compare them and automatically use the best one. Basically, these represent small steps in power that you'll want to gather across an area to maximize your potential, but on their own, they aren't going to make your build. They're also come in tiers, with higher tiers capable of rolling higher numbers. Each biome you cross will drop its own tier of trinket. There are also some other features on the floors that you can choose whether to spend the time to get to or not. Various pots and crates can be shattered for gold drops and sometimes potions, but of course if you spend time hunting down every breakable on every floor, then you'll probably not make it very far. There are also chests hidden around the place. These drop loads of gold when opened, and the blue ones can also drop trinkets sometimes. The gold chests can drop higher rarity stuff, including clock seconds and relics. At the end of most floors, there'll be a statue you can poke that will give you a choice of 3 stat blessings, each one costing gold. These are different from the level up blessings, as these don't affect your skills, but instead give passive boosts to things like elemental damage types, mana, and movement speed, and so forth. Each time you purchase a blessing, higher tier blessings of that type become available in the pool, and previous tiers of blessings are removed. There are often multiple blessings of that type that do different things, so you'll want to zero in on the ones that are most useful to you currently, since the unchosen ones will escape the pool. If you choose a Tier 2 Blessing of Spirit that increases your mana regen, all other Tier 2 Spirit blessings will vanish, and you'll be able to find the Tier 3 ones instead, and you may grab one that, say, reduces mana costs across all your skills. Each tier of blessing costs significantly more gold than the previous one, and there are 4 tiers for each type. You can also use gold to re-roll blessing choices, both from these statues and from level ups. At certain floors, the timer will freeze, and you'll get a defense gauge to fill. Large waves of enemies will start spawning, each bigger than the last. Elite enemies will show up in greater numbers here. You can find them in floors as well, and they often drop lots of good stuff, including clock seconds and bunches of XP. Then, once the gauge is full, a mini-boss will spawn. These can be pretty nasty, especially later in the game, and are not randomized elites, but rather unique threats, sometimes with gimmicks to learn, like the spooky ghosty near the end of Act 1, with his ability to clone himself and do crazy amounts of plague damage. Then, at a certain floor in each zone, you'll face that biome's boss, a big story boss with lots of health and several attacks to learn how to dodge. These are by far the most complex fights in the game, and at the first few times you meet them, they'll take several minutes to bring down probably, but eventually the idea is you'll be able to melt them quickly after some progression. Thankfully the clock is frozen during these fights as well. They drop amazing loot though, often including a choice of unique relic, and then you'll move on to the next biome where everything will get much harder. So how does all the meta progression work in this game? Well, there's a lot of it, and it's all very important to getting strong enough to blast through the earlier challenges in seconds. As you kill elite enemies and bosses, you'll gather these purple crystals called soul stones. You lose your levels, trinkets, and gold on death, but you keep all of these. At the hub, you can use them for several things, including the skill table. You can spend stones to unlock new skills to bring on a run. Every act in the game has a choice of 6 skills you can try, and you can mix and match them however you wish. There's also Blessed Gear. This is gear that has its own inventory and is not lost on death like trinkets are. Each slot has a specific type of gear, and you can spend soul stones to buy various bits of it at the hub to try and get some upgrades. Sometimes bosses and gold chests may drop some of this as well, and the statue at the end of floors that let you buy blessings will instead occasionally have blessed gear for sale, allowing you to grab some for gold. These are pretty important together because they have large boosts they give you, and as you get farther into the game, you'll find more and more powerful rolls on this gear. Relics are arguably even more important, being extremely powerful items that you can only equip a small number of at a time. You have a reliquary that holds all the relics you've found thus far. It starts at 3 pages large, but you can buy more pages with soul stones, and you can also sell relics and blessed gear that you don't want for more stones. You have a small grid inventory where you can equip as many of them as you can fit. Each of them have powerful passive effects that can really put the finishing touches on a build, but there are also the unique relics. These not only have really strong passives, but they also modify a skill, often drastically altering how it works. Like, for instance, these silver bullets, which lets you build up a shield called Conviction from kills, and then burn through the shield when you use ranged skills to add significant lightning damage to all of them. You can also use large numbers of stones to upgrade a relic, which enhances everything about it, including the unique skill changes, making them very strong, but this takes a lot of soul stones. Interestingly, there's also a Path of Exile influenced crafting system for relics. You can find fragments of tools like shards and PoE, 6 of them forming into the full tool. You also drop full tools from things like gold chests and bosses sometimes. You can apply these tools to relics to craft them in different ways, like upping their rarity or altering their implicit mods. It's pretty cool, and shows how much you're meant to tinker with relics for a strong build. Finally, there's the bell. The bell is one large skill tree, but it doesn't directly use stones to buy nodes. Instead, as you gather stones in runs, the amount you get will be applied to the bell, kinda like an experience gauge. Then at certain thresholds, you'll earn points you can spend on the tree, although you can pay stones to respec it, with the cost rising as you put in more points. The bell is really neat to me because it has a mix of significant bonuses as well as entirely new mechanics you can spec into. The smaller nodes represent big increases to stats and things, including resistances and maximum clock time, things you can't easily find elsewhere. The big nodes can be entire mechanics, like say the red portal. Once you unlock it, the red portal has a chance to appear in runs, and you can skip forward a few floors as long as you've beaten the floors before, potentially saving you lots of time. It can even skip you past mini-boss floors. A good use of the red portal can see you going way farther in a run than you normally would have. Other bell upgrades can increase the chance of it appearing and increase the number of floors it can skip. I think this is a neat addition because it changes how you play and what you're looking out for, making the pace of runs different. There are plenty of other fun bell nodes too, like the ones that increase the size of your relic grid so you can equip more of them. The stacking soulstone and gold drop nodes are great to get as early as you can as well. There's actually another progression path, by the way, that only opens up at endgame called constellations. These are a series of like 50 different constellations you can put points into for various effects. I'm not there yet, so I can't really show you or give you any detail, but they do seem very cool. Hellclock is an easy game to recommend for $20. There's a lot here, and it's only gotten better with some sizable updates that have recently dropped for it, often adding entirely new mechanics and refining the experience. With stuff like the world tier system and dissensions, there's a very robust endgame filled with stuff to find. There's even going to be an expansion that adds a fourth act onto the story in the future. Ultimately, this game does something that I love to see in this genre, which is to focus on allowing the player to make complex and busted builds that obliterate increasingly ridiculous content. Only some roguelites can say they have as much focus on allowing truly broken builds, and it's always nice to see all these moving parts and progression systems and how they're all going to fit together to allow for some outrageous late-game silliness. I'll put that Steam link below for you to check out. I hope this was a good look at the game mechanically to help people decide if they're interested, considering the complex nature of how it all works together. Thanks a bunch for watching, and I'll see you next time.